chestnut tree. So the American chestnut is native to the Carolinian zone, which includes southern Ontario. It sort of ranges in the eastern North America. And the species is classified as endangered in Canada because of a blight disease that was accidentally introduced into the United States. Ron has dedicated some of his property to the Canadian Chestnut Council and has planted hundreds of American chestnuts for the council's blight resistance breeding program. Ron also engages with his neighbors who have reported wild American chestnut trees on their properties. He puts them in touch with the council so that naturally blight-resistant trees have a better chance of being identified. You'll remember in the novel that Dorothy finds an American chestnut in her backyard, and her and Ray make a decision to just let that yard become as wild as it might. And yeah, just one of the ways the American chestnut pops back up in the novel, its future pops back up. So the Chestnut Council does critical work to restore the American chestnut, but the council's also been an important voice in caution about the use of genetic engineering. And this is very relevant because there is a US university that has developed a genetically engineered American chestnut, genetically engineered it to be blight tolerant, though after 7 years of testing, it turns out it's not blight tolerant. It also doesn't survive very well. There's a litany of problems with it that we predicted. And so it's failing as a project, but the story's not over because the university still wants to have it approved. They're still fighting for a genetically engineered tree, especially after having invested all this time and energy. But we have resources about it and we continue to discuss it. But I just mention it because it's the direct connection here to our questions about what does genetic engineering mean? And now we have this novel that starts with the story of the American chestnut. So we asked Ron to talk with us a bit about the American chestnut because it appears as the first tree in the novel. And yeah, and so Ron, you work as a volunteer with the Canadian Chestnut Council, which is a small group of dedicated volunteers that does amazing work. It has an agreement with the Ontario provincial government and to implement, a strategy to restore the tree. I wonder if you could tell us why you dedicate your time to restoring the American chestnut tree. What is so special about this tree in particular?
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I've always been interested in forestry since I was a young lad. Spent a lot of time in my dad's bush back on the farm and grew different trees from seed and that. So the American chestnut always intrigued me. As a high school teacher too, we were involved with reforestation projects and that sort of thing. A lot of my sites, though, were not conducive to American chestnut. But once I retired, a good friend of my father-in-law's took me to my first meeting, and the rest is history. I became a director and eventually became chair. I love trees. On my own property now, we have start with 10 acres of bush, and now we have about 20 acres with the various restoration projects. And I guess the American chestnut intrigued me because I'm a bit of a history buff. And the American chestnut was sacred to the Ottawadron tribe, which was part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in our local area here, and the role that the chestnut played in First Nations culture. And the early use of the colonial period of the chestnut, and that it was a commercially viable timber as well as a food supply, highly nutritious. So I'm keen on restoring that. So part of the council's mission is to restore the ecological, cultural, and economic value of the American chestnut. And so it's part of our culture, and it's I guess it's trying to save something, because a lot of our hardwood forests, of course, are under attack from a multitude of other diseases and pests. And if we can bring the chestnut back, especially to restore its ecological value, there's about 275 species depend upon the American chestnut. So our forests are very different from what they were 150 years ago, species-wise and that sort of thing. There's all sorts of birds that you would never even think of that depended upon the chestnut because it provided food for insects. So that whole wood food web has been altered. So we can restore that. We can restore part of our ecology. Sorry,
Amazing.
I prattle on.
No, that's amazing. It's so powerful, Ron. And I'm so inspired when I learned about the work that you do and the work of the American chestnut restoration, that you are investing your time concretely in something that you won't see the results of in your lifetime, that you're planting trees that you won't see what happens to them. They have a lifespan and a future that's beyond your own. And I wondered if you could tell us how you see that future and how it feels to do that work in that way, where you can look ahead, but you don't quite know what will happen.
Well, I guess it's you always, I know my own children used to always, when they were younger, would say, like, why bother planting all this, any sort of tree, because you'll never see it come to full fruition. But my thing was, I plant the trees for my children and my grandchildren, and I guess I take a little bit out of the page out of First Nations, and that you look 7 generations back and 7 generations into the future. And I'm just part of, I feel strongly in that philosophy that you've got to pay it forward, sort of thing. So if I can contribute to that in a small way, I think that's important, and hopefully that's part of the family's legacy. Then is that we helped preserve part of the Canadian culture, because I am descendant of immigrants, that we support our adopted homeland and improve upon it. My grandfather always said we came to Canada to be Canadians. So I also take that to heart from my grandfather.
Well, thank you for sharing, Ron. That's so amazing. And so, because we've had discussions, CBAN and the Canadian Chestnut Council, about genetic engineering, I wonder, as a last question, if there's anything that you want to say about the genetically engineered chestnut tree, the proposal to genetically engineer it. When you're thinking about the future of the tree and your own efforts, why would it be a concern to you that there could be a genetically engineered American chestnut tree?
Well, the Canadian Chestnut Council, we think we are going to be able to breed a blight-tolerant, if not a blight-resistant American chestnut based on the original genetics. And that if we can save the original tree species by using its surviving genetics, that's what we want to do. This sunny tree that's engineered just sets up a symbiotic relationship with the blight. The tree lives, but so does the blight. And of course, I was trained as a scientist, and nature abhors a vacuum. So my biggest concern, personally myself, is that the blight will mutate to overcome whatever thing genetically or that they engineer into it using CRISPR or any of these things, that and it will create something worse that will kill all, that will eliminate all the chestnuts. And so, and again, we're trying to return a tree to the ecosystem, and a genetically engineered tree is not part of the original ecosystem here in North America. So I'm a bit of a purist, but we don't know the long-term effects of a genetically engineered tree, how it will respond in the environment, and of course, all the insects that consume it, and the birds that consume the insects, and so on and so forth, and the food chain and food webs. What impact does that have on that sort of thing? And I think we can achieve a tolerant tree to restore to the environment, and that it'll take its natural role and restore part of our ecosystem. Of course, that's under attack from all directions. But that's been the stand of the Canadian Chestnut Council from the beginning, was that we would not support the genetic engineering of an American chestnut. And that's still our policy.
Well, thanks for that, Ron. I appreciate you spending the time with us, especially because Ron and I had a little chance to exchange about the book, The Overstory. And you had said, many of the human stories seem depressing. And so it's great to talk to you. This is, and hear about your work, which is so uplifting. And the work of the Chestnut Council, all these people invested in the future of trees. I find that really important and exciting and very helpful to learn about. So thanks for spending that time. And I know you won't be able to stay to participate in the discussion, so I appreciate you making the time today, and for all of your work. On behalf of all of us, to thank you for your work.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope your book review goes well.
Great. Thanks, Ron. Take care.
Have a nice afternoon.